Good. How's it going, everyone? Welcome. Everyone ready for the last session of the day of opening acts? Yeah. Move over. All right. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. My name is Matt Liebowitz. I'll be your moderator for today. You can follow me at Matt Liebowitz. I'd like to give the panel a chance to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump right in. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Maish. I am a platform architect in Cisco, blogger, vExpert, author. I blog at technodrone.blogspot.com. You can follow me at Twitter at MaishSK.
Phoummala Schmitt, also known as Ad Exchange Goddess. I'm a senior systems engineer for Contour Data Solutions. And I'm also a blogger. I write for Petri.com and The Register.
Hi, my name is Melissa Palmer. You can find me on Twitter at vmis33. I'm a systems engineer with NetApp and vExpert and new blogger.
I'm John Arrasjid, known as VCTX001. You can find me on Twitter. I'm also an author, been at VMware for almost 12 years. I'm about to move into a new role as in the office of the CTO at EMC.
Hey, how you doing? I'm Mike Preston. I am a systems analyst with the school board in Ontario, Canada. So obviously I'm a customer. I'm a blogger at blog.mwpreston.net. And to be honest, I'm going to have lots of questions for these guys. So.
I'm an author too. Okay, so let me give you just a quick overview of how this is going to work. So I've got questions here that I can ask, and some of them are good. As the moderator, I have to pick which ones. But what I'm really hoping is going to happen is that this is organic. So as we ask the panelists questions and as they answer them, I hope we get more from the audience, and we can kind of grow organically. Does that sound good? Audience participation?
Yep.
So for those that ask good questions, who wants a green band here? Yes? For those that ask questions, we have plenty of bands to give away, so feel free to ask questions and you'll get your band. Everybody ready?
Yep.
Okay. So why don't we start with a popular topic that I think we've talked about in a bunch of the panels today, and that's the hyper-converged infrastructure, right? How do you guys see that changing the data center from where it is now to kind of 5 years from now? We'll start with you, Maish.
I think that the hyperconverged is going to change the way we think about everything, including virtualization, applications, storage. Everything will change because all the solutions will have to be as close as possible to the actual applications. That's what I think the hyperconverged idea is supposed to be, wants to achieve, to put everything as close as possible to the application, to give it more speed, more power, and more performance that you can give out to your users. So I think that will probably be one of the biggest changes.
I think with hyperconverged, it's going to change IT in the sense where it's going to simplify everything. Instead of having your storage admin, your server admin, your network admin, and then the guy that does everything, it's just one person, and it's one single management console, and there you go.
Yeah, I think the single point of management and the easier pane of management is a really, really important point here, is the simplicity of the converged infrastructure and the scalability. With traditional infrastructures, you know, I came from a massive ESX environment as a customer, like 1,000 host massive, and we had our individual segregated clusters because the technology didn't exist yet. So I think it's going to be simplicity and scalability.
I do agree with everything that everyone's saying. I'll give one other perspective that I would look at. Even with converged infrastructure, you're simplifying the unit of compute and all the other stuff. And you may even localize some storage and provide that capability. But in addition, there is integration with other technologies, existing legacy environments. So the thing that I would add is we have to think about how that fits in, the simplified version of the infrastructure, these individual building blocks with the rest of the different pieces that fit in as we make a transition. The other thing we also have to think about is how does that play in the cloud space? So if you look at Amazon and you look at some of those other vendors, including VMware as far as the cloud goes, they're all looking at how do they use the converged infrastructure to support that bigger solution.
So hold that thought, John. We've got that question on here as well.
Oh, sorry.
Hold that thought. Go ahead, Mike.
I see it as definitely simplifying things, but what I'm most interested in is 5 years down the road, how updates and hardware refreshes and things are going to go with hyperconverged, with different CPU generations and things like that, whether it's going to be a rip and replace. Coming from an SMB, it's not that easy to just haul everything out and put all brand new stuff in. So,
yeah. So go ahead, we have a question already.
In terms of, I get the simplicity of the single pane of glass, how does that play out, though, in terms of generalists versus specialists? One of the reasons we have this is we have the specialists. So are we you saying that one guy's got to know it all? I mean, how do you think that's going to play out in terms of personnel?
Good question. So I'll just repeat the question so everyone can hear it. Just correct me if I'm wrong. So as we move to the hyperconverged infrastructure and we've got this single pane and everything's managed through one place, are we going to move away from specialists and just move to generalists? Is that kind of your point? Anyone want to take a shot at that? Go ahead.
Possibly. I mean, I came from a global environment, over 50 countries. We had hundreds of VMs. But our data center engineers, we had maybe 6 because we consolidated and we got rid of people. So, from a cost perspective, it'll lower your FTE, supposedly. You may still need a specialist here and there, but the majority, management's looking at it as like, well, if I don't need a storage admin, to manage storage anymore, why have 2 FTEs? I can just cut back 1. And next thing you know, you don't have a storage admin at all. Because my last job, I had 6 hats. I managed Exchange, storage, virtualization, and backups. When did I sleep? Never.
I think there's also an evolutionary aspect. To say that we're going to have this overnight change, I think we all recognize that's not
Going to happen.
realistic for every company. But I think there's going to be an evolution where individuals working with the technology, so basically the technology needs to be simplified for manageability. There needs to be a concept of what I consider a self-healing environment. Regulatory compliance will drive how much of that you can actually do, but we need to find a way to simplify the administration. We all recognize that as more technologies come out, there's more complexity, and although we try to hide the complexity from the actual consumer, the administrators then pay the price of having to deal with how do you tie all these pieces together. And I think CI is one of the ways that can help on that. But I do think it is going to take some time, just like we did with virtualization and cloud and all that stuff.
And a lot of it depends on the organization and the way they react to change and the way they're structured. Because I see some organizations going towards a CI model, but they still have their VMware team, they still have their storage team, they still have their network team. But I see other organizations building a new CI team and taking people from every kind of area, cross-training them, and forming this new generation and this new team. But there's a lot of processes that need to change with that, and not every organization is ready to make that shift right now.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, it's kind of this follow on that. How much of this innovation that we've seen in the last couple of years with converged infrastructure, how much of that do you think is being driven by the people that end up in virtualization who kind of fill the other roles already? Kind of say, well, I know how to do most of this, and now I'm doing virtualization, and they're trying to pull this all kind of back into,
I'll take the one.
like NSX or things like that, or you see the storage, like storage virtual machines and things like that.
So just to make sure I understand, are you saying where is most of the innovation coming from now?
Yeah, is it being driven by that? Are these admins who've done everything else and now they're virtualization admins? Are they saying,
I see.
we know how to do all this, so why don't we try to innovate and bring this stuff back in?
So are you saying is the driver for converged infrastructure coming from above at the CIO level, or from the admins that have already deployed virtual infrastructure and say, I see this technology, I think it can help? Right. Is that a fair assessment?
So I think there's 2 aspects to that question. Number one, I think there's a driver also from the actual organizations, as you say, but it's more from the administration and people, the tech people, which are touching the technology, because they see that I don't want to go to a storage admin and tell him, please provision a LUN for me, which I need to grow 15 times within the next 3 months, and it's a lot of process. So they prefer to do the things themselves. From the CI, from the management level, I think it's a lot less, because they just want things to work and get things done. So they're not really interested to know exactly who does the work underneath it. It makes things more simple, of course, with having less manpower and less costs for themselves. But I don't think they're that much interested. The one other aspect I also have is I think the vendors themselves, for example, VMware, are also pushing that same mantra, because they're saying, okay, we're going to give you perhaps a hyperconverged infrastructure, or another company will do the hyperconverged infrastructure. But we want you also to manage the storage, the network, with NSX, with vSAN, with everything else we want you to do as one person. So I think the vendors are also pushing for that as well, besides the actual people from the organizations.
There's still the other challenge that how do you take all that complexity, I think, and simplify it, but still provide the power for the administrators as well as the architects to do those special, instead of just the best practices, what are the best practices for that customer and actually fitting into that space? I think it's going to be an interesting challenge as we go forward. What I hear from customers specifically, and hopefully there's some customers here who can validate this or not, the customers want the simplification so they can actually have a streamlined IT organization. But at the same time, they also want special features to do certain things. Let's say you're working in high performance computing. CI may actually have that specific fit. We see that with rastering engines for people who work in the video games as well as the video production space. Same thing with Cloudera, Hadoop clusters, and things like that. I think it's going to be a hybrid for a while, and I think the partners that are in this space, VMware's just one, there's a number of other ones that are out there, they each have overlap, but there are specific areas that they're trying to differentiate on. Ultimately, though, a lot of these converged infrastructures still have an underlying virtualization stack. Some support multiple, so you might have VMware, you might have Microsoft, you might have other types of virtualization underneath. You still are going to have some of the administration of that aspect that is not hidden by this interface. So once again, it's an evolution of our roles as system administrators and architects.
There's a question over there.
So going, you said you wore 6 hats, and you said, when did you sleep? So if I buy into that's where we're going, which I 100% do, what gives? What do we let go of so that we don't kill ourselves doing this? Or how do we say, oh, no, really, I can do it all, but we need more than one of me? You know what I'm saying? Is there like a, are we shifting something somewhere else so that it's not or is there an automation, other load coming down the pipe that makes it to where, yes, you can do this in such a way that yes, you're doing all the roles, but you can do it without killing yourself.
So just to make sure I understand the question. So as you adopt the hyperconverged infrastructure, are you kind of saying, does that just shift the burden of responsibility to someone else? Does it reduce? Is that kind of your question?
That's what I'm saying. What's going to be reduced somewhere else? As let's say I was the network guy, or I was the exchange guy. Now I'm both those things involved: virtualization, storage, and everything else. Let's say there's a finite number of hours a day. I'm now holding all those roles. How do I do all those and not?
So is it going to increase my workload, not decrease it, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead. I think you're probably
Well-
best equipped to answer that question.
Hyperconverged technology, or you find technology that's going to be simplified. For instance, Tintry. We actually went to Tintry because the simplification of the storage management, we didn't have to worry about anything actually. It's plug and play. It's like USB. With our virtual environment, I think I looked at me once a day compared to 3 or 4 times a day going in. So finding something that's more simple reduces our workload. And automation comes into play.
The other thing,
That's a huge play there. Go ahead.
when we look at the role of IT, how much has it changed in the last 30 years? How much has it changed in the last 10 years? And actually just in the last 2 years. If you look at cloud, that was old, it's new again. I mean, we had different terms for it back in the mainframe day. We're seeing something similar on converged infrastructure. We've had a similar approach. Do you go with CISC versus RISC for processors and things like that? What I'm seeing, I work with the Unix Association and a few other groups as well. What we're seeing are these conferences that are tied specifically to address the changes that are happening in IT. So there's a term called DevOps, which is a concept. It's not necessarily a rule set or anything like that. There's also site reliability engineers, SREs, as people work in the cloud. I think that is one area that may overlap with this hyperconverged infrastructure of, if we're automating this process, how does this individual in this role managing this handle the controls, the management of those components, but also think about the reliability aspects as well. It's not a DR person, it's not a high availability person, but it's understanding the complexity of everything that's tied together. So you've got the building blocks. Here's 5 Lego blocks, right? But You're going to put it on some kind of infrastructure that already exists, externally facing, internally facing. I think the evolution is more along those lines. We'll have some new name for it. I don't know if SRE is going to be it, but it's going to be something that will be a change. And I think it's actually going to be coming in the next 2 or 3 years.
So Mike, you're a storage guy, right? I think that's
Yeah.
fair to say. How do you
Yeah.
think this changes the storage admin's role?
Well, I'm not a storage admin. We actually have somewhat of a storage team that I go to, but in terms of me, it changes my roles. I don't necessarily have to speak to them anymore, right? I don't necessarily have to go to them.
Get that
But
man
the
a
thing
green
is,
band.
I see their point as to, well, I just don't want these guys running rampant, running all over the place, doing what they want. Hyperconverged in a way, though, I mean, they're almost their own separate boxes, right? It's not their big SAN, it's not their big baby, I don't have to go to them. But in other solutions, like software-defined storage and things like that, I still think we have to have the need for the storage people. We still have to have somebody there to fix stuff when it breaks. It's just a matter of having some kind of control underneath as to what the vSphere admins or these hyperconverged admins can take, basically. So.
Okay.
So as we move past converged infrastructure, the next logical step of automating everything, you start to get into configuration management, SSOM, management, Puppet, all those sorts of players. Do you see lead market in terms of dashboard being ServiceNow, CAC, or any of those players? And then who's winning the war as far as configuration management goes out there these days? It's such a wide open. Like, it's the wild, wild west. As far as there's so many different players. Even open source things is pretty tough. Why would we be looking to standardize on one of them? Why should we be standardizing?
Okay, so as we move up the stack, I guess, as we've deployed converged infrastructure, who is the leading player to automate and orchestrate and provide that kind of automation around that infrastructure you just put in? Okay.
Why should we be looking for one of those?
Yep. Okay.
Here's the thing. A lot of people are looking for that one silver bullet magic product that will do everything for them. It'll do the automation, it'll do the orchestration, it'll do the configuration management. And I don't think we're there at that point. I don't think there's one thing that'll do it all. It's more of a mindset and a way of doing things than an actual product. I see a lot of customers saying, I want to automate everything, I want to go, orchestration everything. Well, what do you want to automate? Well, what do you mean? I want to automate everything. I said, but what are your processes? What are you doing on a daily basis? So a lot of people don't even necessarily have an understanding of the things they're doing day in and day out to automate them. So sometimes it's almost more work up front to set your processes, set your automation, decide what you want to automate, decide where the time is being put in, what the quick wins. A lot of times with these, you really need to get the few quick wins under their belts so people start seeing the intrinsic value and continue the journey.
Yep.
But I don't see one product standing out more than anything.
Yeah, it's a good point for those that were here for the automation orchestration panel that was just here before. Really great point that came up is you can't automate something if you don't understand it, right?
Yep.
So you really need to understand what you're automating before you do it. Anyone else want to comment on the automation piece?
I see Ruby as one of the tools that constructs that we use for this. But there's also something that's been around forever, CF Engine. How many people have heard of that? That's actually evolving. So I know Mark Burgess, who works on that. They've got a company, but there's an open source side and there's a commercial side. And I see other vendors doing that. I agree 100%. There is no one answer. It's just like there's no one cloud. There is no one virtualization platform. Diversity or competition actually drives for a better solution in the long run. It's a little challenging as you work through trying to decide which one you want, but if you pick one, stick with it and try to understand as much as you can as you do that implementation. But as you said, you have to understand what you're trying to solve before you actually say, oh, just use this technology.
Is there another question? Go ahead, yeah.
So I want to go back to storage convergence. We're seeing now with VMware, right, with vSAN, we're seeing with Nugenix, all these people that are saying, hey, converge it, which is totally different than the tin tree and the NetApp model that's existed forever. So they're trying to make it simpler for us in putting it all in one box, but is that ever going to scale? I can't put the same number of spindles and IOPS in my ESX cluster, and yet it seems like for simplicity's sake and for uptime, that's where we need to go versus our normal monolithic SANs. And yet, I mean, what's the future? What's the trade-off? Simplicity versus I need compute, I need storage. So, I mean, how do you guys see that infrastructure changing?
Yeah, so what's the trade-off, right, between this simple to deploy and manage infrastructure versus a large environment where you need to scale quickly? Want to take a shot at that?
Not really. I'll pass it.
Okay. Who wants to take that one? John, you want to take a shot at that?
Repeat the question one more time, just so I make sure sorry.
So converged storage
Yep.
versus our normal monolithic storage, right? I have 2 controllers and a bunch of JBOBs,
Yep.
monolithic, versus putting a few disks in each machine and magically they're scaled out.
I think you actually answered the question with the way you described it. There are different use cases, and as you described, you have to understand what you're trying. It's like when you pick RAID levels, right? Why do you pick it? You look at the applications. I think we're going to have some slightly different approaches. Maybe there's going to be some overlap with that, but I think the same thing is going to apply in this space. We're still going to have some of the traditional models, but we're also going to have, with this concept of converged infrastructure, having the virtual machines or the workloads closer to the compute rather than on a shared storage device. And we're seeing that, like, for example, with Nutanix and some of the other companies out there. I don't think there's one right way to do it, because over the years I've watched this. People say, well, we should absolutely do it this way because it's the best way of doing it. And then you find these corner cases. And then those corner cases might get bigger. And as we go forward, I do think there's going to be a hybrid approach as we do this, because there are a number of different vendors that will find ways to have either the CI or the traditional monolithic storage as a use case or a compelling use case to say you should buy this versus that. And the same thing applies to everything else that we've been looking at. It's going to evolve over time, but I think there is still going to be multiple ways of approaching that.
Go.
All of you probably were in different places 5 years ago. You're probably sitting on this side of the audience watching a panel of people that are just 5 years ahead of you. And now you're 5 years ahead of people that are out here. What did you do to grow as an architect to think about how you think differently to be able to understand this stuff and answer these questions? Like, what's the path that you follow? Maybe not 5 years, that's long, but over the past couple of years, how did you make that jump to, and I'll quick 2-minute elevator pitch on what you think was the best thing you did recently that helped you to sit on that side of the panel?
So just to repeat the question, that's a great question. Give that man a green band. So how did you grow, right? A few years ago, our data centers looked very different than they do now. How did you grow yourself to kind of understand these technologies and be able to sit up on this panel and talk about them? We'll go through everybody.
So I'll bite first this time. Yes, 5 years ago, I was sitting the first time I came to VMworld in Copenhagen was the first time I was here was in 2010. 4 or 5 years ago was the first time I'd ever been in a conference like this. So from my perspective, it was firstly learning the technology and looking not only at specifically the technology, but everything around the technology. Not only VMware, but the business around it, the storage around it, the network around it, everything you need from the actual business perspective helped me grow as an architect. That not only am I designing a VMware solution, I'm designing a full solution, including backup recovery, automation, everything from start to finish for the customer, because I look at the big picture. So look at the big picture. Don't centralize or focus on one small thing that you're currently doing. Try to broaden your horizon and look into things to go and grow in.
I was lazy. I just wanted to find something that could make my job easier. So I just started learning, studying, coming to conferences, started writing, keeping up with the technology to find things that could make my life a lot easier, that I didn't have to work so much. And eventually, you pick up on things. But my overall thing was I just didn't want to work all the time because I was working literally 24/7. You can ask that man over there. I think I slept maybe like 3 hours a day. And there's some days I went 48 hours. And my goal was, what can I do so that I don't have to be up all the time? And that was the driving force.
3 hours kind of sounds like VMworld.
For me, it was, I've always liked infrastructure, and I've always liked all the different areas of infrastructure. So for me, it was a natural progression to kind of make that jump from my little silo to learning more about everything else. And for me, the most helpful thing was finding people that were willing to teach me and take the time. And I've never had anybody tell me no when I've said, hey, I want to take a shot. That's my first, architecture project was a 2-node ESX cluster in the DMZ. I mean, I look at it now and I kind of laugh, but that's how I started. And it was going to the different teams saying, hey, I'm working on this project. Can I run some ideas by you? Would you mind coaching me through this? And that kind of stuff, and just growing from there.
I think that's great career advice in general, by the way, virtualization or not. Go ahead, Tom.
For me, I think people know kind of where mine was. It's working on reference architectures like the vCloud Architecture Toolkit. I got to get a lot of feedback from customers and partners and competitors to identify what to do and what to change in my thought process. And then the other one is definitely working with the VCDX program and teaching others. I also learned from people that, hey, I thought this, but now I'm learning something from the people I'm actually teaching.
The biggest thing for me, I'd say, would be coming out to events like this and sitting in the audience and asking people like this questions and just surrounding myself by really, really smart people and just leveraging, the VMware community and all it has to offer has really brought me a long way.
Exactly. As long as you're willing to ask people to help you, I don't find many people saying no.
Yeah, don't be embarrassed.
There's nothing wrong with
every
asking
one
for
of
help.
the experts has had to be in your shoes if you're asking a question for the first time. People are willing to help each other out. This community is really big. If you look at the VM Underground community, the vExpert community, we're all about helping each other. So.
Sharing knowledge. I think
Yes.
If you share knowledge, people are going to share back with you, and that's really how you grow.
Go ahead, you had a question?
I had a question about infrastructure and the way we're still very manually going through and adding hosts to vCenter or adding storage in manually and trying to figure out, okay, what kind of storage do I want, setting the properties for that. When's this stuff going to be able to just broadcast their own services and say, hey, I'm an ESX host. Where's my vCenter server? And when's vCenter server going to be able to say, hey, I'm vCenter server. Are there any ESX hosts that want to join me? And so that this stuff can just kind of figure itself out and then be self-healing. When are we going to get to that point with vCenter, all of the different components?
There's one thing you have to think about, though, regulatory compliance and security guidelines. So how much do you want to have automated like that and still meet the security requirements that you might have in your organization, right? That's a good question. Maybe within the next few years, I don't know. But I've been in security before, and I don't think it's ever going to end. There's all kinds of different things that you have to think about tied to that. I know it's kind of a side on the question, but I'll leave it to the others.
Yeah, I came from a highly regulated pharmaceutical environment. And that kind of thing, just go discover, would have never worked because before I could even put the host in the environment, I had to qualify all the specifications, what was running on it, what hardware was on it, what it was compatible with.
Yeah.
So that model wouldn't have really worked in that environment.
And I think we're starting to see some things come to light, like things like VASA with VMware on the storage end anyways, of broadcasting what features are available and where to place VMs. As far as hosts joining vCenter, yeah, that's a tough one.
I would agree. Compliance would be a huge one. I'm working on a project right now, and that would just never go. I mean, you have so many requirements you have to go through. Security, it really, it could cause a lot of problems. If a host joined the wrong vCenter or, somebody was testing something for fun, the next thing you know, it joins production. Oops,
I don't think regulatory compliance should stop innovation and technology. So every reason I hear right now is, oh, this would not work in that environment. Guess what? There's probably going to be a lot of environments, like he said.
Yep.
You would be okay with that. So
Sandbox environments, isolated.
There's no reason why the technology should be stopped by regulatory.
The technology could probably work. It shouldn't be that theoretically that difficult to do, but unfortunately the only one which works here in VMware, and I understand not for very much longer, will be able to answer that question, because we don't have I personally do not have the insight into that information, what VMware is going to do. It would be something which I'm sure that if enough customers want it and make their opinion heard, that it could be something which they could put into the product.
Well, what is coming forward that you've seen some announcements on? There's other stuff that's being discussed this week as well. The key is the technology is being put in place to do this. But let me clarify what we've all said. There are a lot of different things that will define what you can and what you can't do for automation. Change control, how do you go through that process? In a sandbox environment, in many cases, it's a lot different than in a production environment, because if there is a potential risk of automatically adding a host and having virtual machines migrate to that, there's not one thing you have to think about. There's a number of things. What are the different applications? I mean, we all know about affinity, anti-affinity rules. Does that play? I mean, I can't answer the question. I don't know how to formulate the exact question, but regulatory compliance we see because we've dealt with customers or our own organizations on making sure that security is there, but automation is there. So if you put too much security, ease of use is compromised. If you make it too easy to use, security can be compromised. So I don't know if there's an exact right answer, but I just want to clarify that because it's not that we can't do it, it's already happening. There are vendors here today that are doing things like that, trying to actually make it easier to add different components to your infrastructure.
I do see where Hans is coming from in the terms of having an environment where that might be okay, because my actual environment, it's a 6-host cluster. It's fairly small, and I would be all on board for having something come up, join vCenter, and in fact I do with boatloads of orchestration and scripts. But
Good. So when we were talking after, Matt only got to ask one question, and when he hit you, you said, hey, what about cloud and all? And he said, oh, we're going to come back to that. So I didn't ask a question like that, but if my question's not as good as yours, you just substitute.
My question's awesome.
Shoot.
Wow. I'll ask mine anyway, but I think we should go on that theme. Since 2006, when we started using VMware, my data center has become more converged. However, VMware is telling me that I should be doing a cloud or a hybrid cloud. My end users are doing SaaS, so I've got my EDP in the cloud, I've got all these other things. My end users want a converged desktop, and yet, while I have been converging, I have all these external forces now telling me that it's simpler if we outsource all these things. The app will live close to the data, but it will not be anywhere near my data center. And the only thing I can look at is like Horizon or XenApp to try to pull those apps back together. What do you think about that? Do you think that's the future? Is that a fad? Or
I'm not going to say it's the future or a fad. I think we're going to have to wait and see. I hate to defer the question, but we're still learning and we're still experimenting in that space. Not just VMware, but other vendors. And there is a lot of marketing. I would try to cut through any marketing from any company and really look at what is actually being done and what are the impacts to other things that you need to be careful about. Things like disaster recovery or high availability, security, I mean, we mentioned those. I don't have an answer at this stage. I'm still kind of learning how some of these other companies are trying to play in this space, and it's still evolving, I think. I just don't have an answer on that.
I see a lot of people taking an application that's not core to their business and putting that towards the cloud. Because like, okay, we can focus all our innovation on this one system and all our resources, but it's not making us any money at the end of the day. So let's find an expert in the field, have them put it in their cloud, and that frees up our resources to do things that are important to our business and our bottom line.
But now I'm not hyper-converged anymore. And once they do that once, they do it again and again and again until all of a sudden, I don't have an infrastructure. So
I get what you're saying.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
So you're raising,
finally be an artist.
you're asking some very good questions because these are the questions. These are the questions that we need to provide to the vendors. VMware is one, but there's a lot of other ones that are out there, and most of them are here at the conference. You're going to see some differences of opinion on that when you talk to each of the vendors.
That's a good question. Yeah. I mean, I see it as a good question because there's a trend to go cloud. Yeah, just like you said, your core infrastructure applications. Look at Office 365. Please, somebody tell me email is not important. But how many people are jumping, on board to Office 365, and that's pretty core. And my last employer jumped, and eventually other things are going to go too, like Oracle, SAP. It's just a slow shift. And I think a lot of that's coming from upper management as well, and not just the CIO, but CEOs and CFOs, because why do we need to be in the business of a data center? Why can't we put that in the cloud?
And so what you're saying is also like the SaaS concept of let's go with technologies that are SaaS, Whether it's in the cloud per se or at the vendors?
Not even cloud, but why do we need a data center in our facility? Why does this office need a data center? I don't want to manage, crack units and generators. Why do I need to take care of that? Why don't I just put it somewhere else and host it? But it's my equipment.
I see a lot of startups that are focusing on cloud first and then their own data center as a second opinion, because when they're getting funding to get started, they have to be very careful about how they use those resources. And they're finding that cloud is a quick way to go in, but they still need to make sure that they've got the security frameworks to protect their IP. Yeah.
So one more question, then we'll move on to another. We'll talk about the cloud. So we'll take one more question, I think, with you, and then we'll move on to the cloud.
I just wanted to add a couple of things that I heard. One of them was adding flows automatically to vCenter. How to deploy is enough for a while.
Yep.
Yeah.
The other question I heard was hyperconverged versus storage capacity. Things like vCenter looking at 35 plus 5 disk per host. So if you put 2 terabyte drives, that's 70 terabytes per host. So that
That's not hyperconverged, though. That's not really hyperconverged. Those are rack mounts with lots and lots of disks.
Good. Okay. So who wants to talk about the cloud? We're at VMworld, right? We wouldn't be VMworld without the cloud.
Wow.
Right.
Where's the unicorns at?
So you've all designed and architected, right? We're here to talk about architecture and infrastructure. You've all done architecture and design for your own internal environments. Now customers are moving to hybrid clouds and private clouds. How does that change how you design and architect your environment?
It changes everything, because the biggest problem that I find is you have no control of, or it's very difficult to control completely the hardware or the environment with which you are provisioning in a public cloud. So you always have to understand, firstly, what the vendor is going to give you, what your SLA is, how much security or your requirements, if you're going to be able to be compliant, or your company is going to be able to be compliant hosting your applications in some kind of a cloud provider. So it changes everything, because there's a lot of parameters that you have to start thinking about, which were not behind my firewall and I control the firewalls coming in and coming out, because there's a noisy neighbor that you don't really know who the noisy neighbor is, or you do. Depends on what kind of infrastructure you design. If you have your own virtual private VPC, or if you're using a shared environment, it'll be completely different. So it changes quite a lot.
I would agree. It changes, and also, depending on what type of cloud, where you're hosting, it may cost you more if you're pushing more data up. Let's say it's the end of the month and you're running reports.
So the network, right?
Yeah, it's like, oh wait, don't do that migration. Don't migrate anything, because it's the end of the month and we got to run reports. I actually had that happen during a divestiture. They said, don't do anything because it's going to cost us more because we're in the cloud.
Yeah. I've seen some cases where, people have, you look at an infrastructure building in-house and you think you sized everything right, but at the end of the day, oh no, I need 2 more ESX hosts. I'll jump through some hoops and I'll get the funding. But if I'm negotiating a really big cloud contract, I need to do all my terms and conditions up front. And I'm not really going to be able to change that without a lot of penalties down the road. So I feel like there's a little less room for error, and you really need to understand your requirements when you're making that kind of jump.
Redefine print.
Exactly, redefine print.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to pass because you guys covered all the... I agree 100%.
Yeah, the biggest thing for us is looking at things like security and compliance when looking at the cloud. We house a lot of personal data in our data center now, and there's different stipulations within Canada as to where that data can sit. So when we're looking at cloud providers, we need to know locations of data centers, as well as locations of disaster recovery data centers and things like that. So,
actually, to that point, let me add one thing. How many people here live outside of the United States?
Hey, that's my job. How many people here live outside the United States?
So in each of the countries that you live in, you're going to have different requirements on where personal data, financial data can sit. When you go to the EU and in different countries in Europe, it's very strict. So if you're going into a cloud, you can only go to a cloud that's within the boundaries of your country. And that's the other thing that makes it more complex when we start looking at the cloud environment when you deal with personal or financial data.
Good.
We're also hosting for quite a number of customers. And the biggest issue we have is Microsoft licensing. The number of clusters I have just because
Yeah. So great question. Give that man 2 bands. How do I manage my Microsoft licensing when I move to a public cloud?
I have no idea.
Anyone want to think?
So it depends on which cloud you're going to.
It
right?
depends.
If you go to Azure, I'm sure it's fine.
If you go to Azure, they've got it covered. With VMware and with other vendors, we have to do negotiations, but the thing is, we don't actually have necessarily the control that the customers actually can have. So when you talk to a particular cloud provider and you talk to the vendors who are making the applications, that's where you can actually push for change in the industry. I think that's going to make the difference.
It's often very expensive, especially when I think when you're in office.
Yep.
It's the cost to switch a license are quite steep.
It's
Right.
always very expensive.
Yeah. And it changes every 6 months, right? The rules for the licensing? You go with the data center version, and that actually gives you that flexibility that fits the cloud model. Right.
So I'll tell you, I see your question 1 second. Interesting observation though. It seems like everyone here is talking about the challenges of public cloud, right? No one's saying the public cloud is great. So, my question to that is, would you say then private cloud, starting there first, is really the right way to cloud adoption and then move up to public cloud, or is there a happy medium where you could do both?
I think,
Please. No, go ahead.
I think there's not one organization which exists that's not already using the public cloud, if it be AWS or VCHS or Rackspace or whatever else, whatever kind of cloud it is. And if you think that they're not using it, you're slightly delusional, because everybody uses the cloud.
Yeah.
Everybody just passes their credit card from their department and they use the cloud.
Do you have a cell phone? Do you have a mobile device of some kind? Yeah.
So I don't know if it's going to be easier to put up a private, because when you want to put up your own private cloud, you have a lot of, firstly, as we said, a lot of planning you have to do for yourself. I have to have the right capacity. I have to know when the capacity has to grow, how quickly I provision. Everything behind is the whole infrastructure behind it you have to think about. So putting up a private cloud is not necessarily that easy. So I don't really have an answer for you there.
Awesome.
You said,
Go ahead.
yeah. You said everything, so, yeah.
Good. Okay. There's one question. Go ahead.
So I want to go back to the Microsoft questioning. When we talk VDI today, I don't know why they call it VDI. The only desktop that we deliver is a Microsoft desktop. And yet we see iPhones, iPads, all these other things. Do you see, when will we have VDI that is not a Microsoft desktop delivering anything else? I know the Linux desktop. I mean, are any companies working on that? When is the...
Not it.
I mean, VDI is just one thing.
So the question is, will there be a VDI that's not really, how do I deliver a Microsoft Windows desktop?
IVDI? I don't know.
Is it? Do you
VDI,
have VDI now?
Well, I mean, wouldn't you be delivering, looking at an application rather than a whole desktop?
Right.
Yeah.
That's the real thing, right?
Yeah, that's software as a service model, right?
Yeah.
Good.
Well, I mean, isn't that the difference? I mean, we talk about people that are in the cloud now, but they're in the cloud now using software as a service. They're not necessarily an infrastructure as a service.
Correct.
I think
Yep.
every single one of you described the cloud as a blocker for infrastructure as a service, not from really a software as a service. And so as Amazon, as Microsoft, as VMware cloud offerings grow, you see it more growing as software as a service offerings that then take away his infrastructure as opposed to company managed infrastructure in the cloud.
I do. I mean, internally at VMware, I can't name all the products. There's a lot of them, but you probably use the same ones. They're almost all software as a service. Our HR system, software as a service. Our employee management system, software as a service. We use Workday, for reviews and stuff like that. Almost all of the technologies that we use are software as a service. The exceptions might be the Exchange servers we run. So there's question on whether it's software as a service or not. I mean, it depends on where it sits, but I'm seeing a lot more of that. I also see that I use my iPad more than I use my laptop. And that is all in the cloud. I mean, I really don't keep anything local. Yes, I follow our corporate guidelines, about can I not use Dropbox or Boxnet, but the other applications, we've got a VPN connection, we're using Horizon, we go into our environment, and that is where we get the secure access to the SAP, the software as a service applications that we use.
Give that man a green band. All right, we've got time for one more question. Did you have a?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's a very good idea to go. Well, Salesforce is one of the biggest
Yep.
examples that
Yep.
everyone is actually using.
Yes.
It does include an extra risk. How do you practically, any one of you can answer it, how do you practically help yourself, because you are still responsible for the information you are giving in the cloud? Because they can go bankrupt, or they could go, it happened, I think it happened last year with a big cloud provider that says, we're done, you got 30 days to take your data. How do you protect yourself for that? Because you, in the end, whatever SLA you sign, you as a company are responsible for the information. Not the data as such, but the information.
So for things like Salesforce, there is an option to do an archive, correct? That might be one solution. I'm not saying it's the best solution, but that is one. And some of the other vendors are doing similar things. I mean, exporting of certain data or requiring them as part of your contract. And you can always negotiate contracts, right? I mean, sometimes they're harder than others, but you can say, look, I need to make sure that this is how we handle our data in case of a major catastrophic event, and this is what we need to do. It could be, and I'm not saying put it on tape, I'm talking about maybe having replication to some geographically distant location. That's one of the ways that I would look at doing that, working with those vendors.
You're still giving all your information to that company, not to yourself.
That is correct, but that's the choice that you have to make as a business.
That's
right?
part of the choice when you're deciding what applications to send. NetApp has, NetApp private storage for cloud, so you can have your data living on your NetApp in a colo. It's your data, but you're just using the cloud for the compute. So if that cloud goes bankrupt, I don't care. I still have my data there. They're not touching it. They never see it. So that's a solution that I see customers using for more sensitive data that they still need to be able to burst at the compute layer.
Well, so thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Great session. I want to thank everyone for the questions and making this interactive. I especially want to thank our great panel. Follow them all on Twitter. They're excellent. Everyone did a great job. Thank you guys so much. Round of applause.